Hi, Steve Andrews here and welcome to Outlaw Bookseller. Today this is just a brief news video to talk about one of my favourite contemporary SF writers. In fact, two of them, but with a focus on one of them. And if anybody's watched my sort of videos on sort of top contemporary SF reads, which I posted sort of last year, they'll know who I'm talking about. But to move swiftly on, I wanted to do this now because there's some reissues upcoming in June, which are germane to what I'm about to say. And I'm very, very pleased to discover that the wonderful Dave Hutchinson, who I think is Britain's finest, can I call him a second generation? I always think of people like Christopher Priest and M. John Harrison, the sort of great new wave survivors, as the first generation now of, you know, the greats who are left over. And in the generation sort of below that, if you go 10, 20 years below that, so maybe it's a third generation, there are people like Dave Hutchinson, Adam Roberts, Chris Beckett, Nina Allen, who are doing, you know, superb literary SF work. And it's taken much longer for these people to become successful, with the exception of Adam, who's been writing SF for a long time, simply because their work isn't bog standard space opera. It's more, it's broader, it's more interesting, it's more literary, it's more literate. It's more varied. So, you know, those sort of writers have a harder time in the sort of genre, sort of community and situation that we have now, where we're seeing the same old tropes time and time again, you know, and these people are more material and more interesting and have more to say and are worthy of your time. So, Dave Hutchinson, the last book that came from Dave was The Return of the Incredible Exploding Man a couple of years ago. And it's a funny one, that, because Dave's a very, very witty guy. And it sort of ends rather inconclusively. Maybe we'll get a sequel, we'll see, but maybe he's just teasing us. I quite like that myself. And Dave's a great guy. I had a event with him back about 2017, and he's very self-effacing and relatively quiet, but you know, he's got a wicked sense of humour, fantastic writer. And I became a big fan of his Fractured Europe series, and this is the first one. Europe in Autumn, that came out in about 2012-13, I think, and I've sold loads and loads and loads of copies of this. 2014, and it was Arthur C. Clarke Award shortlisted. Absolutely fantastic, and I really recommend this book. If you haven't read it, for me, it's possibly in my top 2 or 3 British SF novels from the last decade. Shortlisted for the A.C. Clarke, BWSA and John W. Campbell Memorial Award, and really fantastic stuff. And Dave was a journalist for many, many years. Back in his 20s, he wrote a lot of short stories. There's about 4 books of them. They're quite hard to get now. And he's done some novellas for small presses. None of his major books have come out in hardcover, which is infuriating me. I want hardcovers of these. Solaris, please. Let's have some reissues, if even for libraries, and I can snap them up. Not that libraries buy books any these days, it seems. So if you've not read Europe in Autumn, please do. Just to recap, the basic idea is kind of a meshing of espionage and SF. It's near future. Europe has balkanized. There's all sorts of small states. So there's a certain affinity with The City and the City by China Miéville. But this is a whole new order of things. You can feel the influence of Len Deighton, John le Carré, also people like Christopher Priest. And it's about a chap who works in the basement of a kitchen and a restaurant. And he gets recruited to be a courier and to courier documents, because the internet is secure anymore, across borders in these very small and sometimes very large, sometimes very strange countries. And he discovers that there are more countries than he thought that were out there. I'm not going to tell you any more. It's the sheer realism of this that I loved. You could feel the heat in the kitchen and you could feel his sweat, and it's very witty. And this is great stuff. So I obviously loved this, and it sort of pulls the rug of reality from under your feet. There's some really interesting techie conceits in there, and there are 3 sequels over the years. There's the very wonderful Europe at Midnight. There we go. I know these have different covers in some territories. I think different covers in the States. Europe in Winter, and a few years ago we had Europe at Dawn. So the way they go isn't spring, summer, autumn, winter, anything boring like that. They're autumn, midnight, winter and dawn. Now that's more like it. There's a bit more imagination there. And I'm not usually big on series, but I do like these. They're recurrent characters, they're witty and playful, and as I say, they're really well written. Great, great stuff. So I can't say enough good about them. The good news is that later this year, I think is September, there is a 5th one coming out, and it looks like this. And also, great news for Dave, because it'll raise his profile and bring him some more cash and hopefully get him some more book sales, because I think he's horribly neglected. There's going to be a TV series based on these called Europa. So I don't know much about that yet. I've not researched it. I tend not to look too far into these things. I want to see them with an unbiased eye. So that's great news for Dave. So if you've not read these, get out there, give them a try. But coming up very soon, from our friends at Solaris this month is a reissue of this book, Shelter, which is volume 1 of the Aftermath. Now, Shelter has a sequel called Haven. Now, the sequel, Haven, is by Adam Roberts. So it's Dave Hutchinson and Adam Roberts, shared universe thing. Now, what Dave told me was that he and Adam, because they're chums, they were commissioned to write these. So it's not something they sort of took to publishers. The publishers sort of said, you know, can you do a sort of great English catastrophe novel of the type we haven't seen for decades? And of course, a lot of us who are, you know, a bit older, you know, we love the catastrophe novel, we love the Wyndham, we love the John Christopher, all that stuff. It's a tradition that goes way back in British SF. And, you know, we also love the stuff which took that apart, like Ballard, Priest. We like later ones like Richard Cowper's Twilight of Briareus. And of course it goes back way back to things like Richard Jefferies, you know, books like After London, Wild England. So, you know, it's fantastic stuff. And, you know, we like the way that the Britishness is really sort of comes out in these. And there is a theory that it's because we're an island. There's a wonderful book by Nicholas Ruddick called Ultimate Island on the nature of British science fiction that says because we're an island, we tend to have this sort of siege mentality. And, you know, we love the idea of the countryside being emptied of people, you know, so there's just a few of us being survivors. And that's what these are about. And I saw quite a few of these. The difficulty with them is because they're by different authors, you think, do I put them under Hutch or do I put them under Roberts? So you have one in each and then you don't have enough to keep them together. It's a real issue. But they're really great, and both of them are very witty writers and they've got their own voices. But the fundamental idea about these is in the not too distant future, a swarm of asteroids called the Sisters break through our sort of defences and they plunge down to Earth. And they sort of pretty much put an end to our technological civilization. And 100 years later, people are starting to sort of like recover from things. So Britain's very agrarian and rural again. And it looks at various characters in the south of England. There are sort of like mini sort of despotic communities. There are rural communities, what have you. And it looks at those two things. And there's some great characters. There's a character in this one who has epilepsy, but there seems to be something else about him. So maybe we're going into Wyndham territory. But they're very tantalising and they tease you. But they're just really, really well written. So if you like things like Wyndham, Aldous, Ballard, Priest, you know, you read Keith Roberts, you can't really go wrong with these, D.G. Compton, but they do have a witty side, because they're both funny guys. So they're supposed to be 4 altogether, but there hasn't been one for several years, because Haven came out within a year of Shelter, and it came out, let's see, when did Haven come out? 2018, so it was 17 and 18. And there hasn't been any since because the pandemic's been an issue as well, and both the guys have been working on other stuff. And I was worried that they hadn't sold enough and that Solaris wouldn't sort of complete the series. However, they are reissuing these with new covers, and Shelter's being reissued later this month in June, and Haven I think is going to come out again in September. And I can show you what I think the covers will look like, but it does say on these pictures these covers are not final, so they should look like this. So in the meantime, you can still pick these up in these covers. I mean, I've still got copies in stock, but you know, the new covers are coming and I really like these. I think they're fantastic. So they've been popular with the readership who is more familiar with the history of British SF. But they're fantastic writers, so do pick them up. So that's just a bit of news. So I'm very glad to see those getting reissued. I'm glad that Dave is going to have the TV series, and hopefully that'll push him into a wider audience. So get ahead of the pack. And if you haven't read Dave Hutchinson, do read him. I really recommend both Shelter and the Fractured Europe books, and see what you think. There's also some novellas out there in small presses as well, and really I just think he's fantastic, really, really good. And he is the sort of great hope, I think, of sort of British literary SF alongside Chris Beckett and Adam. They really are the sort of writers I wish we'd see more of, and we underrate these people. They're just fantastic. So young people, if you're reading SF and you're bored with all this sort of huge stuff that Adrian Tchaikovsky and what have you come out with, it's got its place, it's fine. Give these guys a go and get at some real writing and discover the English catastrophe novel. This is Outlaw Bookseller signing off for now. I'll be back soon with an out and about video, I think.